There are seasons in life when the road ahead feels endless. When progress is slow, answers are quiet, and every step forward feels heavier than the last. In those moments, doubt whispers that you are late, lost, or somehow behind. But the truth is softer than fear allows you to believe. This is a story about patience, not the kind that waits with clenched fists, but the kind that trusts the road even when it bends out of sight. A story about learning that growth doesn't always announce itself, and that the longest journeys often shape the strongest souls. This story will show you why the long road is not a punishment, but a preparation. In a quiet valley town, where mornings arrived slowly and sunsets lingered like unfinished thoughts, there lived a man named Elias. Elias lived in a town where nothing hurried. The streets curved gently instead of cutting straight lines, and even the river nearby seemed to move as if it had learned patience from the land itself. Mornings arrived with a soft light, never demanding attention, never rushing anyone awake. For most people, it was a peaceful place. For Elias, it felt like a pause that had lasted too long. He was a man of routine. He woke before the sun, folded his bed with care, and drank his tea in silence while the world outside slowly breathed into motion. Discipline was not something he admired from a distance, it was the spine of his life. He believed that if you showed up every day, if you worked honestly and endured quietly, life would eventually meet you halfway. Yet, as years passed, Elias felt something tightening inside him. He watched others leave the town and return with stories of progress, promotions, recognition, milestones neatly checked off. He listened politely, smiled when expected, and offered congratulations that sat heavy on his tongue. Inside, a quieter question kept returning: when does my turn begin? Elias wasn't chasing fame or applause. What he wanted was simpler, and somehow harder to name. He wanted confirmation. Proof that patience was not a mistake. That discipline wasn't just a way to stay busy while life happened to others. Each evening, he walked the long road that stretched beyond the town's edge. It disappeared into the hills, winding forward without revealing where it ended. He told himself these walks were for clarity, but often they only deepened the ache. With every step, his thoughts measured distance, years passed, effort given, progress unseen. You know this feeling. The quiet exhaustion of doing everything right and still wondering if you're falling behind. The fear that maybe the long road isn't leading anywhere at all. Elias believed in effort. He believed in strength earned slowly. But standing there, watching the road fade into the horizon, a question began to form, one he was afraid to answer. What if patience was not enough? After that question took root, Elias did what he had always done when doubt appeared: he worked harder. He began waking even earlier, as if stealing hours from the night could bend time in his favor. His mornings grew sharper, more deliberate. Every task was measured, refined, repeated. Discipline became a shield against uncertainty. If the road was long, he would simply walk faster. Days started to show small rewards. A project once overlooked began receiving quiet acknowledgement. A supervisor nodded with approval instead of indifference. Conversations changed tone, subtle, almost invisible shifts, but enough to be felt. For the first time in a long while, Elias sensed movement. Hope returned carefully, like a fragile thing not yet ready to announce itself. He carried himself differently. His steps gained rhythm. His back straightened as if his spine finally trusted the direction it was facing. Each minor victory whispered the same promise: you're closer than you think. At night, when Elias walked the long road beyond the town, the hills no longer felt mocking. They felt temporary. He imagined what waited beyond them: stability, recognition, a moment where the effort would make sense all at once. The road didn't shorten, but it seemed kinder under the weight of expectation. Others began to notice him too. "You've been consistent," someone said one afternoon. "You deserve this," another added later. Those words mattered more than Elias realized. They fed something deep, a belief that control was possible, that discipline could command outcomes if applied long enough and hard enough. He started counting progress again. Weeks. Results. Signs. Movement. You've done this too. You tell yourself that if you just push a little more, sacrifice a little longer, the finish line will finally appear. You convince yourself that patience means endurance without rest. Elias stood taller now, but his patience had quietly changed shape. It was no longer calm. It was urgent. And though success seemed closer, something fragile was forming beneath it, a reliance on momentum, and a fear of what might happen if it ever stopped. The fall did not arrive with noise. There was no dramatic announcement, no single moment that demanded attention. It came quietly, disguised as a delay. Elias was told to wait. An opportunity he had worked toward for months was suddenly under review. The words were polite, empty, and strangely final. Days passed. Then weeks. Messages went unanswered. Meetings were postponed and never rescheduled. The momentum he had leaned on began to thin, like air at a height he wasn't prepared for. At first, he stayed calm. He reminded himself that patience was his strength. That delays were temporary. That discipline always paid in the end. But time has a way of revealing truth through silence. The acknowledgments stopped. The nods disappeared. Someone else stepped into the space Elias believed he had earned, not loudly, not cruelly, just effortlessly. Life moved on without explaining itself. The long road felt different now. Each evening, Elias walked it as before, but his steps were heavier, uneven. The hills no longer looked temporary. They looked permanent. Endless. He replayed conversations in his mind, searching for the exact moment things went wrong. He revised his past with brutal precision, turning effort into accusation. If I had pushed harder. If I had spoken sooner. If I had been better. Failure didn't shout at him. It sat beside him in the quiet, asking questions he couldn't answer. You know this part. When the thing you trusted, your work, your timing, your strength, stops responding. When life doesn't say no, but also refuses to say yes. The space in between becomes unbearable. Elias felt something crack, not his discipline, but his belief in it. The idea that effort alone could protect him began to collapse. The road he had walked with confidence now looked like a mistake he'd been making for years. That night, standing where the path vanished into darkness, Elias did something he had never done before. He stopped walking. And in that stillness, the fear finally caught up to him. Elias did not accept the fall. He couldn't. Acceptance felt too much like admitting that the years he had given so carefully might have been misplaced. So he doubled down. He filled his days with motion, refusing to leave space for thought. He revised plans that no longer mattered, rehearsed conversations that would never happen, and clung to routines that had lost their meaning. Discipline, once a source of strength, hardened into punishment. He told himself he was being patient. But patience, when stripped of trust, becomes something else entirely. Every night, Elias returned to the long road. Not to walk it, but to stand at its edge, staring into the distance as if the horizon owed him an explanation. His mind stayed locked in the past, reliving success, rewriting failure, bargaining with moments already gone. If I just wait a little longer. If I don't let go. If I stay ready. But readiness without direction drains the soul. Guilt began to shape his thoughts. Guilt for resting. Guilt for doubting. Guilt for feeling tired. When others seemed to move forward so easily. He compared himself constantly, measuring his pace against lives he could only see from the outside. Each comparison tightened the knot in his chest. You know this paralysis. When moving on feels like betrayal. When letting go feels like losing proof that you tried. When the long road becomes a mirror reflecting everything you fear you are not. Elias wasn't angry at the world. He was angry at time. At patience itself. He had trusted it, believed in its promise, and now it felt like a lie told slowly. The road hadn't changed. But Elias had stopped seeing it as a journey. To him, it had become a verdict. And so he remained there, suspended between effort and exhaustion, between hope and resentment, unable to move forward, unable to turn back. It was in this stillness, this quiet refusal to release the past, that life prepared to intervene. Not with force. Not with answers. But with something far smaller, and far more unsettling. One evening, when Elias wandered farther than usual, he found himself at the edge of the forest that bordered the valley. The path narrowed, shaded by the thick arms of old trees, and the air smelled of earth and quiet. He had walked here before, but tonight it felt different, heavier, as if the forest itself was waiting. Ahead, he saw someone sitting on a fallen log. An old man, cloaked simply, eyes reflecting the fading light. He didn't rise when Elias approached. He didn't speak. He simply nodded, as though Elias had been expected all along. Elias hesitated. Then, without thinking, he spoke. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I try. I work. I wait. And nothing changes. The man listened. Only listened. And then, after a pause, he asked softly, "Do you walk the road to reach the end, or to become the one who walks it?" Elias froze. The question felt like wine through his bones. He thought of the years measured by outcomes, the months counted by small victories, the days strung together like beads of hope. And he realized, he hadn't asked himself what he was learning while walking. He had only measured progress, as if life were a scoreboard. I don't know, he admitted. His voice was smaller than he expected. The man smiled. Then perhaps you are ready to begin. It was not an answer. It was not advice. It was a mirror. And mirrors are uncomfortable, they show what you refuse to see. Elias sat beside the stranger, letting the forest hush settle over them. He watched the last light fall over the hills, realizing for the first time that waiting was not the same as stalling. The road did not have to move him, he could move within it. And in that stillness, the first flicker of trust returned, quiet, almost imperceptible, like the first star appearing at dusk. You know this moment, too. When someone says nothing yet everything changes. When the world doesn't fix you, but simply shifts your perspective. When the road you feared begins to feel like a companion, not a sentence. And for Elias, the long road finally seemed less like a test, and more like a teacher. The days that followed were subtle, almost invisible. Elias no longer measured his steps or counted victories. He simply walked. Sometimes slowly, sometimes with deliberate pace, letting the rhythm of his body guide him instead of the tick of the clock. The hills no longer mocked him, they became markers of progress, each curve a gentle reminder that the journey itself mattered more than any destination. He returned to the forest often, though the old man rarely appeared. The memory of their conversation lingered like a quiet echo, urging him to observe rather than judge, to breathe rather than demand. Elias began noticing details he had long ignored, the hum of the wind through leaves, the way sunlight pooled in the hollows of the path, the scent of earth after rain. Life existed here, not in outcomes, but in presence. His work, too, shifted. He still gave effort, but it no longer carried the weight of desperation. Mistakes were no longer failures, only lessons embedded in routine. He learned to pause when fatigue pressed in, to allow rest without guilt. In letting go of control, he discovered something unexpected, trust in himself, in the process, in the unseen currents of life. Evenings on the long road became moments of reflection, not pressure. He spoke less, listened more, and learned to sit with silence instead of filling it with worry. Each step felt lighter, not because the road had shortened, but because his heart had expanded to carry it. You know this change. The kind that cannot be rushed, cannot be forced, and arrives only when you stop demanding proof. Healing begins quietly, through presence, patience, and a willingness to release the past. Elias began to understand, the long road was not a punishment, but a teacher. And in surrendering the need for control, he found his first true sense of strength. Not the strength that bends life to your will, but the one that bends with it, resilient, patient, and quietly unshakable. The horizon still stretched far ahead. But for the first time, Elias walked toward it with peace instead of fear. Morning came differently now. The sun rose over the valley, soft and deliberate, casting golden light across the hills that had once felt endless. Elias stood at the edge of the long road, breathing in the clarity that only patience could bring. The path stretched forward, winding, uncertain, and beautiful, no longer a burden, but an invitation. He had changed. Not outwardly, the town still saw the same man, disciplined and quiet, but inwardly, he was unrecognizable even to himself. The urgency that had driven him for years had softened into steady persistence. The tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his chest, had loosened. Strength was no longer measured by progress or recognition, but by trust in his own journey. Each step he took was deliberate yet unhurried. He greeted neighbors with warmth rather than obligation, and he listened when others spoke instead of planning his next move. He worked with focus, but without expectation. The long road no longer demanded proof of endurance, it offered lessons in presence, resilience, and humility. Elias had discovered a quiet truth: the road does not need to shorten for you to arrive. Transformation does not require visible applause. True strength is forged in trust, in the willingness to keep walking when the outcome is unseen, in the patience to let life unfold on its own timeline. And yet, with this calm came courage. Courage to take on projects without fear of failure, to dream without anxiety over the pace of success, to embrace uncertainty as a companion rather than a threat. Elias felt balance he had never known, the harmony of effort and surrender, of discipline and release. The long road still stretched into the horizon, but Elias no longer feared it. He walked with a quiet smile, understanding finally that the journey itself was the reward, and that patience, trust, and courage were the keys to moving through life with grace. You recognize it, don't you? That moment when struggle finally turns to clarity. When fear softens, and purpose rises quietly, not like a shout, but like the first light of dawn. For Elias, the new day was not just a sunrise, it was a rebirth. Elias turned from the road one evening, looking back at the hills he had walked so many times. The journey had been long, the steps often heavy, yet he felt a quiet peace that he had never known. And in that peace, he understood the truths he had been seeking all along, not in results, not in recognition, but in the lessons the road had quietly taught him. 1. Patience is not waiting for life to hand you answers, it is learning to walk even when the path is unseen. 2. Discipline is not the measure of control, but the willingness to persist when outcomes are uncertain. 3. Trust in the journey matters more than urgency or fear of falling behind. 4. Failure is not a verdict, it is a teacher, guiding you to deeper strength and understanding. 5. Letting go of what you cannot control is not surrender, but liberation. 6. Small, steady steps build transformation far greater than sudden leaps ever could. 7. Presence in each moment turns the long road from burden to companion. 8. True courage is quiet, it is continuing even when the horizon is distant and unclear. You've walked a road like Elias's, haven't you? Feeling unseen, wondering if your effort matters, counting steps while forgetting to breathe. Life does not always give instant proof, but it gives something stronger: growth, resilience, and a heart that trusts its own rhythm. So, keep walking. Even when the path seems endless. Even when fear whispers that patience is wasted. There is strength in each step, courage in each breath, and transformation waiting quietly at every bend. The long road does not end, it becomes part of you. And when you finally realize this, you carry with you a strength that is invisible to others, but unshakable within. Walk on, with patience. Walk on, with trust. And know that the journey itself is your reward.